When the personality sun is in the 56th gate, we have the second example of the right angle cross of laws. Remember that we are in the quarter of civilization. We started with the first 16 hexagrams, actually starts from the 13th hexagram and goes to the 24th. That first quarter is the quarter of initiation. So you had a right angle cross of the laws. The first variation is an initiation, and the theme will be the laws of initiation. And here we're in the quarter of civilization. This is the second right angle cross of the laws in the quarter of civilization. And so this is the laws. The theme is the laws of civilization. The 56, the 60, the 3, and the 50. The 56th gate, the wanderer. This is a metamorphic gate in the throat. It is a throat gate, and it is a throat gate that expresses the abstract. It says, I believe or I don't believe. It is a hopeful or despairing voice. And its metamorphic capacity is the ability to translate the visual sequences of idea and turn them into language as description. This is the gate of the storyteller. This is the gate of the verbal hustler. This is the gate of calling for trust. It is a gate of stimulation. Remember that as the expression of the abstract mind, it is there to express human experience, to tell the story of human experience. And of course, there are as many stories as there are ways. Stability through movement. The perpetuation of continuity through the linking of short-term activity. Stability through movement. Go back to our discussions of the 53rd gate and this primary format energy of the abstract way. That everything about the abstract way is about the movement from beginning to end. That is the completion process. It is essential for the abstract mind that once it has the attractiveness of an idea, that it cannot leave that idea until it's finished with it. You can't just go jumping here and there without completing the process. Quality, first line. The practical sense that even short-term activity should be of value. And what that means is what interests you, go through to the end of that. It is one of the ironies of design that the most existential of all circuitry is the abstract. And yet they don't know it. Because the greatest potential of the abstract is to surrender to their activity in the now, and when it's done, to get the reward through reflection. So when you're dealing with quality, what it's really saying is, when you're attracted to an idea, follow it through to the end, before you allow another idea to pull you away. And if you allow that to take place, if you follow that idea through to the end, it will be of value to you later. And of course, being the first line, being the line of introspection, of looking inward, of trying to find the foundation, this is about what stimulates. The Mars and detriment, the ego drive to make an impression that will misuse energy in trivial pursuits. The drive to stimulate that will express any idea, no matter how trivial. one of the things to see in both logic and in the abstract is their collective responsibility. And that these are things that are not to be taken personally. That the stimulation of others through this gate should be of value. The misuse of this energy is simply not to fulfill the idea itself. That's the whole thing about ideas. They need to be expressed. And when they're expressed, the 56th gate is one of the 3 stop gates, that is, stop codons in our genetics. In other words, the ability to be able to express the idea, to stimulate others, is the point, period. It's not about anything else. And you can't really do that unless you take the idea completely through and you don't get sidetracked. The second line. This is one of the 6 lines of genius. It is called linkage. It says isolated genius that will eventually, remember what I said about language. Isolated genius that will eventually, and it will eventually. That means it won't right away, but it will eventually. That it will eventually find continuity through recognition and support. This is a classic second line. We know that second lines need recognition. They have to be called out. And it is here that genius gets called out. That is, the genius to be able to stimulate others. To get them to believe in you, for example. A genius for stimulating expression that will take time to mature and will need others to recognize it. Now look, if you're a 62, you do not have to experience what you're theorizing about. It's just a formula. But when you're a 56, if you don't have the experience, you can't tell the story. That's why maturity is essential. The storyteller matures with age. They get better and better and better and better at telling the story. You know what it's like. Think carefully. All of you have a story you tell people when you meet them. You know, you meet a new friend and you start this business that we go through where we explain each other's lives and our perspectives, sort of. And over our lifetime, we've collected experience that we think define our life and who we think we are. And we tell the same stories over and over again. Now, the more you tell them, the better they get. You know, and better in the sense of your professionalism in being able to deliver them. You know, it's like you have perfect memory because you remember all the bits and pieces. You know, little things get lost over time. Different things get highlighted over time. And it becomes the perfection of storytelling. It takes time to be a good storyteller. It takes time to mature into a force that can stimulate others. And what that's saying is that that force has to be discovered when they're young. Because otherwise it may be too late. This is always true for second lines. They may never be discovered. They call it. It doesn't mean it's going to happen for them. Mood and detriment. The superficiality which collapses under recognition and is eventually forced to move on. Now, if you take this second line of 56 as a whole, you've got the best description you're going to have for the 2 sides of what the second line nature is. Because it's really an archetype of that. You know, on one side is the genius that comes out of being recognized and supported. I think you could be a great piano player. You know, let me help you. I'll pay for your lessons. And on the other side, you know, this superficiality. I think you'll be a great piano player and you can't do it. And you don't want to be distracted. Why do I have to learn this now? I was fine without this. I was fine until you told me that you thought that I had talent. And now I have to deal with the frustration that I can't do it. That's why I talk about the second line being a place where education is very important. You see that in a young person's chart. You have to point out to them the importance of being prepared in those second lines. This is a child that you encourage to tell you stories. What happened to you today? Tell me about it. And out of that, they learn how to formulate and bring together those stories. It's the beauty of mechanics. That is, the moment that you really understand the mechanical nature, you can always see how you can work with it. Always. The mystery's gone. Third line. Remember, these are all about laws. The third line is called alienation. It says, determine self-sufficiency. Now think about the nature of the third line. The third line feels very self-sufficient until it bangs into something. And then it has to figure out whether it really is self-sufficient or not, to discover that the world is a whole and that this is a collective gate, that self-sufficiency is going to be alienating. Why won't you tell me what happened? You're collective. You're supposed to share that with me. Why won't you tell me what happened? A will and egoism that often proves overbearing and guarantees continued isolation. Here this is acceptable given the son's intrinsic vitality. That is the drive to control and be the focus of expression. Think about what happens to these people. They have a story to tell, and they want to tell a certain story, and then they bump into somebody, and they discover that that person isn't interested in their story. And they tell it anyway. And they try to stimulate them, even though it doesn't really work. But that's their story. And of course, they will learn from their experience with the other whether that story has any value or not, whether it can stimulate the other or not. They can end up being great entertainers, these third line 56s. That is, they can develop a gift to be able to deal with any kind of non-stimulation in those they're trying to reach out to. Venus in detriment. The reversed aesthetic that offends others ensures isolation and eliminates support. The drive to control the expression at the expense of stimulation. I'm going to tell you my story whether you like it or not, and if it bores the hell out of you, I don't care. And remember what the quality of the voice is in the 56. The quality is either hopeful or despairing. Everything about the abstract mind is the abstract's mirroring of the emotional system. The abstract voice carries with it its mental wave of hopefulness and despair. And it always colors the voice of the storyteller. It's what we call the difference between comedy and tragedy. It's simply in the quality of the voice and the telling of the story. It's either a hopeful story or it's a depressing story. For example, we know what the news is. Well, it's true. That's our storytelling. After all, that keeps us going. We find out from the global village exactly what humanity is experiencing on a day-by-day basis, and it's generally despairing. But we find it very stimulating. Nonetheless, we don't like war, but the Gulf War got great ratings. You know what I mean? We find it stimulating. So one of the things to recognize about the lower trigram in this case, these first three lines that are involved in their own personal, they're looking for their own stimulation, and that when they bump into someone, they may deliver the very same story in a hopeful way or despairing way. The difference between somebody who tries to tell you a joke, who really knows how to tell a joke and can remember the punchline, and somebody who tries to tell you a joke and is totally ill-equipped to be in that situation. Now, they'll tell you the same joke, With one of them, it'll be right there, snappy, fast, everybody giggles, it's over. And the other one, it's the same joke and everybody's dying. This range in the voice that's there in the 56, very different from the 62. The 62 can almost be monotone. It's either reasonable or unreasonable. But its tone is the same, but not so with the 56. It goes between this hopeful and despairing. You try to stimulate somebody with a great idea, and beforehand you're hopeful. And you're hopeful that the piece that you've memorized, that you're going to present, is going to really stimulate them, and you think that it's wonderful. And then you get out in front of them, and you deliver it trying to stimulate them, and it bombs. And then you begin the tone changes, the despair starts coming in. It's why I have such abundant respect for stand-up comics. I'm a fool by nature. But the comic, the pure comic, this is something really extraordinary. Because, of course, that is their whole dilemma. Will what I find stimulating, will I be able to transfer that stimulation and get my reward, the laughter? And of course, if not, I've always felt that the comedian that dies on stage is worse than the matador getting gored by the bull. There is a pain that have you ever been in one of these clubs? And somebody dies, and the whole audience dies with them. And there's this, I'm undefined emotionally, this pain that runs through the audience. That you really, you cover your eyes. You hope they'll go away. You hope nobody will hurt them. You hope they won't hurt themselves. Alienation. But out of that can come brilliance. That's the whole thing about third lines. Always remember the magic of a line. Out of those encounters, out of that banging into things, can come a gift for stimulation. How to get that message across. The fourth line. Transpersonal, upper trigram. And of course, being the fourth line, it is the foundation of the upper trigram. It is fixed. And it's there to externalize, and it externalizes expediency. I like this line. The perfection of the superficial personality that can mask when essential its true feelings to secure protection. The gift for stimulation as a role and for protection. Now you see, these people recognize when to stimulate. They are fixed on knowing when to stimulate, and they take on that role. And they take on that role often to protect themselves. We all know that from school. There was always one kid in the class that made everything a joke. Always. There's always that person that makes everything funny. Always. This is expediency. It's using stimulation for protection. If I make the bully laugh, I won't lose my teeth. And I'm only going to make somebody laugh when it will protect me. Now, I'm using just an example of laughter, but of course it can be many other things. The Mercury in detriment, expedient behavior whose price is a constant stressful alertness and nervous anxiety in fear of losing what has been gained. That is the role as reality, the fear of silence and of being uncovered. Of being found out. It's always surprising, even though it's a tradition, when people find out that comedians are depressives, that they have unhappy personal lives, that they're not funny with their friends at all. This uncovering of the stimulating mask. After all, the stimulation is there to get a reward. And the reward is that others believe what you tell them. and that it creates in them either the proper despair, the earth is dying, we have to save it, or it creates in them a proper hopefulness. One or the other. That's the reward for the stimulator. In the movement to the end of the fourth line, we have a change in the cross. And the 3 and the 50 is replaced by the 27 and the 28. And this is the left angle cross of stimulation. The 56, the 60, the 27, and the 28. Obviously, these people are fixed on stimulating others. And so it's an ongoing story. And of course, they can be both very interesting and simply, well, extremely difficult to deal with. And not only will they need to stimulate others, but of course they themselves will need an enormous amount of stimulation because it's going to be their theme in their process. The left angle cross is the cross of distraction. It's a good thing that's not second line. The left angle cross of distraction. I like moving through in a hexagram to be able to see the movement through the crosses, and you go from the law to stimulation to distraction. And these are distracting forces. The fifth line, attracting attention. Unusualness, innovation, and sometimes genius. You will notice that where there is only 6 examples of this word, 2 of them, genius, are here in this hexagram. It's a very special gift to be able to stimulate others. It's so important for us. You see, history is what is the fuel of our evolution. Each generation gains the benefit of the previous one because we store our history. We can retell the entire story of life now. In almost the first 7 years of a human's life, they can get the history of knowledge of this planet. We keep on getting better and better at that, and that's why there is so much value and importance in this gate. Because it's the voice of history. It doesn't mean it's true. That is, you have to hear all the voices of history to recognize the truth of the totality. But each one is a necessary ingredient into the soup of experience. So attracting attention. This projection that the 56.5 can stimulate you. This projection that before the 56.5 even speaks, you're ready to believe in them. It can be very powerful. Unusualness, innovation, and sometimes genius as guarantees of eventually attracting attention and support. Eventually. Stimulation at its most innovative and unusual, but it takes time for it to be recognized. It takes time for it to mature. One of the main places in the life, your Uranus opposition. Your Uranus opposition is the prana point of your life. Life is a prana. You are breathing in until this midlife point. And as long as you're breathing in, you're learning. And at the moment that you reach your midlife point, at the moment of the changing of that prana, you start breathing outward, and that's the moment that what you have taken in begins to come together and flower. It will take 7 years from your midlife point before that is in full force. And then you live out the breathing out. So this business of attracting attention, it comes with maturity. They will be the best at their storytelling after their midlife point if they get there. Mars and detriment, all too often the tendency to attract attention that is self-defeating in its effects. Fifth line, heretic. The fifth line is the heretic. You can stimulate people and try to get them to believe that all firstborn should be murdered. You get into a lot of trouble. Get into a lot of trouble because you can get a lot of people to believe you. The power of stimulation to provoke and disturb. Remember that this is the cross of distraction. These can be deeply distracting forces. Human beings get into the most trouble when they think that the 56 gate is telling them what to do instead of telling them what happened. You know, when Karl Marx with his 11 tells society what to do, instead of just being concerned about what's happened, you got a lot of trouble. The abstract mind is the mind that is there to be able to express to us, make sense for us out of what it is to be human. But it's not there to tell us what we should be doing in the future. That's the job of logic. So the abstract is very distracting. And there's nothing more distracting than this left angle cross of distraction. You know, you attract attention and take people away from what is logical, and you either fill them with despair or hope and send them off into the night. Now, of course, that's not about good or bad. The sixth line. The inherent wisdom in 6 lines. Caution. Caution. Wait a minute. Be careful who you stimulate and how you stimulate them. And like all 6 lines, this is learned early in life. The prudence, when linkage has been achieved, to honor its new commitments in order to secure its footing. That is, honesty in expression, living by one's word. In other words, an idea not as something that you spit out, but that what you express and what you stimulate people with is something that you live by yourself. You see, at the end of the abstract process, there is always doubt. That's logic, eh? At the end of the abstract process, there is always doubt. Because the human experience will teach us in the end that there must be an inherent logic to things. Living by one's word is trying to be able to stay with an idea. You know, like Castro. You know, no matter how much you debunk the idea, no matter how much everybody trashes the idea, you stay with it. And of course what happens is that the 56-6 goes up on the hill and looks down at the world of ideas and is not impressed. Because it's hard to find one that you really think you could live by. Because ideas are transitory. They're transitory. Most 56-6s never find that one idea that they can live by. And they become a storehouse of history. And most of that, the deepest part of that, is manifested in the 6th gate, in the 6th line in the detriment of Pluto. It says, the profound unconscious wanderer. People that were born from 1938 to 1941 have Pluto in the 56th gate. The profound unconscious wanderer, where external yearning for acceptance will unconsciously release the exact energy that creates rejection. A difficult role where the self is unknown and not recognized with predictable results. Wandering throughout the life from one expression to the next, unable to find the stimulation that one could live by. I mean, these are people that are just, how can I say that, uncensored, uncontrolled filters of the human way. I really dig these people. I have quite a few of them in my life. They know so many things. They know so many things. And they always have extraordinary experience in their life, even though they look like, they could be at the checkout counter at Sears. Because it's built into that. But very, very few of them have ever found an idea that held them long enough. It's an enormous challenge for an abstract being to be able to stay with something because it's not its nature. The key is always going to be if one can live by that idea, but live it out and then leave it. The magic in the 11.5, the line of the philanthropist. Ideas are for others. Stimulation is for others. We go from this point of caution in releasing stimulation, and the next step, when you can really be able to live by your word. If you can live by your word, then you can lead